had this nice opportunity. Okay.
Already? That was quick. At least it's only one person. It's as good a time as ever to try out this new map I've made, allowing me to catch everyone's lies just a little bit better. I marked all of the vents with circles and the sabotages with eyes for incident. Clever, right? With this, I can't lose. Alright, let's do this.
It wasn't me. Red, you do realize that doesn't help your case in the slightest, right? Well, I just wanted you guys to know, it wasn't me. Okay? Well, Black, you reported. So, where's the body? The body is in security. Wait a second, security? White, I saw you headed in that direction. Care to explain yourself? Explain what? Don't play dumb. That will not work. Were you or were you not in security? Where's that? Alright, look. White, can you describe what it looked like where you were right before the body was reported? I remember seeing a circle, but like a tall circle, and it was really shiny. Tall circle? You mean like a cylinder? Cylinder doesn't sound like a tall circle now, does it? Alright. Green, just let me hear your side of the story. Well, I was in medbay, and it was also black and white too. So all three of us were in there. And white ran off towards security. And so I thought that was just a little weird. I thought it maybe, like I was trying to stick together, and I don't know why he left so early. And black followed him, so I just followed too. And we ran into security and found a dead body. So I can vouch for that. That did happen. Well, I was in storage. Where was everyone else? Could anyone else have been nearby when it happened? I didn't see anyone else. I was in Shields, making sure everything was okay there. I can vouch for that. I was in Shields as well, doing the download thingy. I was with Purple. There's no way I'm going anywhere alone. You are not going to catch me alone. I just passed Orange and weapons on my way to navigation, so he's good. You heard the man.
Alright, not much time passed, so the ones on the right side of the map can probably be eliminated. That leaves 3 suspects. Black, white, and green. They were the only ones who could have done anything at all near security. White is definitely the most sus out of all of them, but no offense, I don't know if White has the mental capacity to even know what the kill button is. And if White really is in a room with a cylinder, that will put him in the reactor room, which pans out with Green's story. Wait a second.
Green, can you be sure this was a self-report? Did you see the body before Black got to it? I did. That must mean that White's the culprit, since everyone else has an alibi. And Black, did Green immediately follow you out of medbay? He was a little behind me, but I was checking the map to see where my next task was, and he caught up. Then the culprit has to be Green. What? I have no clue what's going on. We're running out of time, so I don't think I have the time to explain, but trust me, it was Green. I don't know what's going on in your mind, but I think it was White. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I really don't like Green's name. Like, I mean, who says Zed? It's just Z, bro. Do you think you're better than us or something? Like, Zed? That name is really annoying. If you guys are voting Green, I guess I will too. I'll trust you for now, Brown. Green it is. Green beans are bad! If everyone else says so. You guys suck. You know that?
Time passes. Reports fly in, but no one is brave enough to vote for anyone anymore. Everyone's afraid that they may have made the wrong choice at the beginning because people are dropping like flies. Eventually, there are only 3 left.
Whoa, you got a lot to explain, Yellow. You see, I was running through weapons to O2, and as soon as I got there, I just saw Yellow standing over the body. And then as soon as I got there, like he just reported. So I don't know about you, but it's definitely Yellow. Um, so please, Brown, you are the one who decides if we win this game or not. With the case this obvious, just go ahead and vote Yellow. Like, it's no doubt. You're right, Brett. It is a pretty easy decision, to be fair. I do want to ask you, do you remember a little something that Yellow said at the beginning of the game? That he was never going to be found alone? I ask you, can you name a single time in which Yellow was alone? Ever since people started dropping, he's clung to me for his life. Maybe that's why none of the tasks have been getting done. But at the same time, we're both alive, and I'm not the imposter, so obviously it must be the person who's desperately trying to shift the blame. Yellow, if you'll do the honors.
That day was a special one for Gamehead 64. He won the game single-handedly, thanks to a little help from his map and a secret technique of his. Proof by Counterexample.
All right, thank you, Logan, for that visual. Now what I want to do is kind of firmly define what exactly Counterexample is, and then I want to show how we can use Among Us, and specifically the visual that we just watched, to kind of help explain Counterexample, and then we can do some examples. All right, so what is counterexample? So first, I just want to provide a formal definition of what exactly it is. So in logic, a counterexample is an exception to a proposed general rule or law, and often appears as an example which disproves a universal statement. So essentially what counterexample is finding a hole in an argument. Once we can find just the smallest hole in a universal argument, that automatically disproves it as false. So you can see at the bottom, it's easy to find for all-inclusive statements or all-inclusive arguments. So for instance, if your argument is referring to all of something or every single one of something or none of something, these type of all-inclusive statements, when you see them, they're easy to disprove because all it takes is one exception or one counterexample to disprove. So essentially counterexample is pretty much a really easy topic to kind of grab. It's essentially just finding a counter to an argument. Also, I thought it was cool. I found a formal definition online which kind of explains it in terms of, discrete logic terms. So it says formally a counterexample to a universal formula is for all x, there is a function of x that is given by a constant c for which that function of c evaluates to false, which I thought was pretty cool because I like to kind of see how you can represent certain statements using these logic terms. So that was cool. All right, so now I kind of just want to give some simple examples to kind of just reinforce what a counterexample is. So we have the proposition that says all the circles below are orange, right? Now, if we look at the circles below, we can see that the first three circles are orange. So if we're just looking at those first three circles, the statement above is true and the argument is true. However, if you look at the last circle, it is indeed blue. So that is pretty much an exception to the statement above, which makes the conclusion false. And if the conclusion is false, then the proposition is also false. So essentially, this is just showing that all we have to do is find one exception to the statement to prove it to be false. And then also the second simple example, so it says the sum of any three positive integers is equal to 6. Simple problem. So if we look at the different sets of elements, for the first one we have 4, 1, and 1. If we add them up, we get 6. 4 plus 1 is 5. 5 plus 1 is 6. So that fulfills the requirement of the argument. However, if we look at the second one, we have 3, 5, and 6. 3 plus 5 is 8. 8 plus 6 is 14. So that does not satisfy the condition of that argument, which is a counterexample, which basically proves that statement to be false. Also, an interesting thing about counterexamples is once you find one case that refutes a proposition or an argument, then we don't even need to check for the rest of the arguments, because all it takes is one simple case to show that an argument is not true. And we can also see this if we're looking at the second example, the last element, because 2 plus 3 plus 1 is equal to 6, but we don't even need to consider that because we've already found an exception. All right, so let me go to the next slide. So now I kind of want to explain the parts in the visual that you just saw and their functional meanings, because I feel like we can use that visual to help us better understand counterexamples. So let's look at vents. So essentially what happens in the visual is that the imposter can use vents after killing somebody to try to evade the scene quickly to divert the attention from the imposter. So that is pretty much the functional definition of vents. Then we have the instance of sabotage. What an imposter can do is sabotage different areas on the map. For instance, an imposter can sabotage the lights, which basically limits the amount of vision for the other crewmates in the game, so they're not able to see as well. They can also disable communications, which essentially means that the crewmates cannot see their tasks. So essentially that's just a way to divert the attention from the actual imposter and kind of just create general confusion for all the other crewmates. And then also we have fake tasks. And what fake tasks are is, for instance, if you're selected as the imposter, you have these kind of fake tasks to make it look like you're another one of the crewmates. So it distracts all the attention away from you because it makes it seem like you're just another person and you're not the imposter. So basically, when the imposter is giving his arguments in the scenes that you just watched, some of the statements that he made, or the imposter made, are false because they're utilizing these different elements. So they might be using events even though they said they were, doing tasks, or they're actually in a space sabotaging lights when they said something else. So these elements, essentially what they do is they create holes in their arguments, right? And that's kind of what I want to reinforce when it comes to counterexample. So what I have, each of these elements represent something different. So for instance, vents represent the number 0, sabotage represents all imaginary numbers, and fake tasks represents all negative numbers. And I made all these things represent these specific numbers because these specific numbers are oftentimes used to find a counter in a mathematical argument. Now, they're not the only numbers that are used to find a counter. Of course, you can use, integers or other different types of numbers, but these are often used to find counters in arguments. So I kind of wanted to provide a little bit more context by doing some examples and also using the visual that you just saw to kind of reinforce these concepts. All right, so let's get to some counterexamples. I thought that was hilarious, but let's keep it moving. All right, so first question. So it says, disprove the following statement by finding a counterexample. So the statement is for all x and for all y, where z belongs to real numbers. If x is greater than y, then xz is greater than yz, right? So first I want to kind of explain this in the context of the game that we just watched, the visual that we just watched. So in the visual, for this problem, we're just going to make x represent the character extra. We're going to make y represent the character y me. We're going to make z represent the character z. So in this specific scene, z extra and y me were together, right? So under all consideration, x was probably the most suspect of the bunch, being that they were the first to head in that direction, right? However, as a result of the vents, which remember are 0, when y surely lost sight of z, he was able to use the vents to get into security, to get a quick kill, and come back like nothing had ever happened. And so because there was an exception in that logic, it can be concluded that z had a hole in it. Z's story had a hole in it, right? So essentially what that means is because z was able to use a vent and get away, considering everything that was brought up, z had a hole in his story. And we're basically going to use that to solve this problem. So given that the reason that z had a hole in store is because he used vents, and remember vents are equal to 0, we are going to use 0 to prove this by using counterexamples. So let's take this statement xz is greater than yz, right? So knowing that z represents z, and z was using the vents at these times, we're going to allow z to represent 0, right? So using this, we can actually evaluate the expression because anything times 0 is 0. So we can evaluate that expression as 0 is greater than 0, which is false because 0 is equal to 0. So this just goes to show that in the case of Among Us, Z had a hole in his logic because he was using a vent at the time, and it just kind of creates a counterexample to exactly what he was saying. So we just use that as context. All right, so let's move to question 2. It says, let x equal to the set A, B. Define a function from x to x as f of alpha is equal to alpha times AB. Also alpha, AB, those are all strings. So remember that x is the set of all strings over x. So the question is f onto x, and prove your answer. So first I want to give an Among Us synopsis. So let's consider the character alpha. And let's let alpha, the character, represent the actual string alpha in this problem. So if we actually look at the character alpha, we can see that the way alpha's story is true, and the way that we can see that alpha is not the imposter is if he's generally with other characters in the game. So those other characters can represent A and B. So if alpha is always with A and B, then we can see that alpha is not the imposter, because if you're with other characters in the game, generally you're not the imposter, because you kind of want to stay hidden away from other people. You want to be very secretive. You want to pretty much stay away from the crowd. So the fact that alpha is near other players, that just proves that alpha is not the imposter. So if we look at that in terms of this question, right? So we have the equation f of alpha. If I can remember how to draw an alpha, there we go. That's the best alpha I got. If f of alpha is equal to alpha times A and B, so the way we can see that it is not onto is by first considering the fact that these are all strings, and there's no alpha you can put into this function to subtract A and B. There's no way to isolate alpha if you're inputting alpha. So essentially this is just related to the fact that alpha cannot be by itself, like the players in Among Us cannot be by themselves if they are indeed not the imposter. So that is question 2. All right, so now I kind of want to go over some real world examples to kind of make this a little bit more concrete. So the first example, basically model checking systems employ, algorithms that involve counterexamples. So essentially what this is, a really cool topic. So if we're talking about safety critical systems, for instance, planes or autonomous vehicles, or pretty much anything that has a safety critical system within it, they require a lot of testing, because in the fact that there is an error with one of these systems, it can cause a lot of damage, catastrophe. For instance, if a plane makes, if the hardware in a plane makes a simple mistake, that can result in the plane crashing, or if a car, intakes the wrong coordinates, that can result in the car going to the wrong destination or even crashing. So what the engineers have to do is basically test a bunch of different inputs and just make sure that it's outputting what it's supposed to be outputting, right? So if we look at this diagram right here, right? So this is basically the controller, the main controller, where all the inputs come in, right? And basically what the engineers do is they input a whole bunch of stuff into the controller, and they look and see if those inputs output what they're expecting, if it satisfies the requirements, right? So what these engineers essentially do is they create a mathematical model that mimics this controller, and they basically just give it a whole bunch of different values, different inputs, and sees if it satisfies the requirements. And I found it interesting, really cool, that they're actually using some logical elements within it, P and Q. So yeah, I thought that was really cool. But essentially what's happening is they're inputting a whole bunch of different things into this mathematical model just to make sure they're not getting any errors. But if it does not fulfill the requirements, then what do we have? We have a counterexample. So the way that it works is basically the algorithm that's employing, this model checking system is essentially just storing all of the errors, all the different counterexamples, to kind of figure out what's causing these errors. And they're called pretty much counterexample algorithms, or algorithmic counterexamples, which I thought was really cool. So this just shows how useful counterexamples are in the real world, and basically testing hardware systems and seeing what inputs cause an error to essentially mitigate, the amount of errors in these safety critical systems. So I thought that was really cool. And then the second real world example, which is much more, this is actually how I conceptualize counterexamples, because essentially a while loop is basically a counterexample. So, and what I mean by this is that the condition that is violated in the while loop is essentially a counterexample to the condition. So for instance, I wrote this simple program where we have an integer x, and it's first established as 0, and then we have a while loop, and the condition of the while loop is x has to be less than 10, and in the while loop x increments itself. So the while loop runs and runs and runs and runs until x becomes 10, and then it stops because the condition is not true anymore, which essentially is an exception. So that's actually the way I kind of materialize counterexamples. Pretty much computer science is full of them, full of exceptions, and they're extremely useful in the CS world. So yeah, that's all I got.